This is an AQA Psychology GCSE revision video for the Paper 2 topic of psychological problems with a specific focus on the Kaij key study for the addiction section of the topic. So to begin, let's remind ourselves how we describe a key study in psychology. On the screen are some sentence starters and some prompts for you to remember, and also a reminder that any key study or key theory could be asked as a 9-mark question along the lines of anything such as describe and evaluate Kaij's study. So if you are watching this video in order to revise the Kaij key study, I will refer you to my little revision technique, which is to jot down key elements, key numbers, key figures or key terms to do with the key study and highlight anything that you think you could apply as AO3 and constantly test yourself just using those prompts like you can see on the screen. So if you're here to revise the Kaij study rather than learn about it, pause the video, steal some of these key terms and key figures and see if you can explain their relevance, and then skip to the end of the video, the section that says check your understanding. Otherwise, let's get started on the study. So the aim of this study was to see if hereditary or genetic factors influence alcohol addiction. Does addiction come from genetics? Does it run in families? Is it hereditary? So the procedure for this study consisted of a case study method. This used questionnaires, interviews, and different methods from the twins themselves who were participants and their family members. Information was also gathered from birth records to identify what sort of twin they were, and also from a public register in Sweden of alcohol abusers, so people that had been arrested for alcohol-related crimes, and that register was used to identify suitable participants for the study. So the participants ended up being 48 MZ twins, so they are identical twins, which is why I've put both of these stickmen in green to represent they have 100% of their DNA in common, compared to DZ twins, which stands for dizygotic, and MZ stands for monozygotic. They are non-identical twins, so they only share 50% of their DNA, which is why I've put them in two different colours. So the idea is, by comparing identical twins to non-identical twins, we can produce a concordance rate. A concordance rate is the percentage of similarity between twins. So if something is genetic, then we would expect identical twins to both share a behaviour or a characteristic in common because they share 100% of their DNA. And also, if it is genetic, then we would suspect that there would only be a 50% concordance rate between DZ twins because they only share 50% of their DNA. Maybe one twin is an alcoholic and the other is not because they only share 50% of their DNA. So this image here is just to represent that they themselves and their family members were interviewed. And finally, they were identified and categorised as someone who does not drink alcohol at all, to right at the other end of the spectrum as a chronic alcoholic. So all of the participants were male and they were all from Sweden. The findings of the study were 54% of the identical twins, the monozygotic twins, were in the same category of alcohol abuse or alcohol use, compared to only 28% of non-identical twins. What Kaij also found was that as the level of alcohol usage increased, there was also a higher concordance rate between identical twins, with 72% of chronic alcoholic twins being in the same category as their co-twin. So as the level of alcohol usage increased, so did the percentage that they were both similar level of alcoholics. But the key finding here for you to worry about and for you to articulate in a question on Kaij is that 54% of identical twins were in the same category of alcohol abuse compared to only 28% of non-identical twins. So the fact that the percentage for MZ twins is higher would indicate that there is a genetic element, a hereditary factor that is linked to alcohol usage and alcohol addiction. Because with the more DNA they share, the more common it was for both twins to have alcohol addiction, compared to when they share less of their DNA, 50% of their DNA, the less common it was for them to both be alcoholics. So moving on now to evaluate the Kaij study. You only need 2 strong evaluation points for a 9-mark question on a key study or theory, but on the screen are 3 evaluation questions, all weaknesses, so all written in red. This is your opportunity to pause the video and to try and answer these questions in as much detail as you can, and in 5 seconds I'll go through the answers. So the first one, Kaij's study focused only on alcohol abuse. This is bad because the findings can't be generalised to other addictions. Whilst the findings do support the biological explanation of addiction, they only support that alcohol addiction is biological. Smoking or gambling addictions or any other addiction that's not alcohol might have an alternative explanation that's better. But we don't know that because Kaij only looked at alcohol addiction. Moving on to the second weakness, interviews. The information on alcohol usage came from the participant and their family in interviews. So this is bad because you can't actually check whether the information Kaij got was accurate or truthful or not. You're interviewing their family members and you're interviewing themselves. So they might not be completely truthful about their addiction, and their family members might want to protect them, so not give 100% truthful information. So there is a likelihood that people would have lied to make themselves and their family members look better. And then finally, the concordance rates, the findings from this study were not 100%. So what we mean by that is the MZ twins, there was not 100% concordance rate. So not every single identical twin who's an alcoholic has an identical twin who is also an alcoholic. There was only a 54% concordance rate, which means that for 46% of the other twins, one twin was an alcoholic and the other wasn't. So that shows that it can't be completely genetic. There must be other factors like the environment. And when we think about identical twins in detail, they share very similar environments. Often identical twins are treated like the exact same person from their loved ones or from their friends. Teachers, for example, might confuse twins, call them the wrong names. Even parents might do that because they look so similar. They're often treated as the same person. So that doesn't fully untangle and doesn't fully suggest that genetics are the only reason for the addiction. It could be that they have very similar upbringings and they spend a lot of time with the same groups of friends, etc. So the cause could actually be more nurture rather than nature and genetics. So to review the Kaij study, let's have a look at my suggested revision technique. Here we've got the key concepts for the Kaij study. So if we just review this, what we have are the fact that it was a case study method consisting of interviews, which I've highlighted in orange because interviews link to some of the evaluation for the Kaij study. The participants were twins, 48 MZ twins, so 48 monozygotic twins, which are your identical twins, and 126 DZ twins, dizygotic non-identical twins. They were all from Sweden and they were identified because they'd all been linked to drink-related crimes. And the study was concerning alcohol abuse, alcohol addiction, and whether it is genetic or hereditary. So the study itself supports and acts as biological explanations of addiction, showing that it is hereditary. So I'm just going to remove that highlight so you can fully see the terms. Moving over to the findings now. 54% of the MZ twins, so the identical twins, which are highlighted in yellow, were both alcoholics, compared to only 28% of the dizygotic twins, which I will highlight in green. So the non-identical twins, and those were the concordance rates that were produced from the study. showing that the more DNA you have in common, so those MZ twins having 100% of DNA, the higher percentage, the higher the concordance rate, and therefore the higher likelihood that they both were alcoholics. Compared to DZ twins who only shared 50% of their DNA, the concordance rate, the findings were much lower, with only 28% of non-identical twins both being alcoholics. So when we move on now to consider the evaluation points, which I will go over in red, there are issues in that all of the participants were on the register for drink-related crimes and they were all from Sweden, which means we can't generalise this to alcoholics who haven't been arrested for drink-related crimes, and we can't generalise it across other cultures because they only used Swedish participants. The issue of interviews with family members and the participants themselves means the data we've gathered is not correct. And finally, the concordance rates were not 100%, which suggests actually the biological explanation of addiction is not fully true. It might be more due to nurture, due to the fact that the concordance rates weren't 100%. There might be elements of the environment that could better explain why a whole 46% of identical twins are not both alcoholics. And lastly, this born addicts question here is a really interesting one, in that by suggesting alcohol addiction is something genetic, that can wrongly mislead people to believe that they're going to be born addicts or that their children are going to be born addicts, when the concordance rates clearly show that actually it's not completely genetic, it's not completely hereditary. So we could scare people for the wrong reasons. So that concludes the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.